This for Donald Trump right here. 58% term number 2 first year. 58% say failure. Come here. Look at this. Who's the next closest? George W. Bush. 52% said.
Public opinion data that emerged roughly 1 year into the terms of U.S. presidents, Donald Trump, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Bill Clinton, shows how the public evaluated its leadership during those periods. In Donald Trump's case, around 58% of people rated his performance as unsuccessful, pointing toward the deep political tensions and controversies present in the country at that time. For George W. Bush, around the end of his first year in office, this figure stood at approximately 52%, a period when national security and international conditions remained major public concerns.
Barack Obama was 48%, and then Bill Clinton way down here at 26%. Of course, his.
For Barack Obama, nearly 48% of people expressed a negative opinion, reflecting the divided public sentiment of that era. Meanwhile, about 1 year into Bill Clinton's term, this figure was roughly 36%, indicating a comparatively more stable economic situation at the time. Now, in this video, we will discuss in detail the decline seen in the performance evaluations of all 4 presidents roughly 1 year into their terms. To watch such special fact-based analysis, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Looking first to Donald Trump, several major factors appear behind the decline in his performance ratings about 1 year into his term. The most significant among these were his tariff policies.
China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA.
His hardline stance on immigration, aggressive actions by ICE, and his foreign policy approach toward Venezuela. Under the America First agenda, Trump imposed heavy tariffs on China and other countries. While this sent a message of protecting domestic industries, it also raised fears of a trade war, contributed to inflationary pressures, and increased stress on farmers and exporters. This created economic uncertainty that directly affected public opinion. During this period, many American companies were forced to alter supply chains, raw material costs increased, and the burden was passed on to consumers. As a result, a perception began to form that even if the benefits of strict trade policy might appear in the long term, in the short term, its impact on ordinary people's wallets was clearly visible. On immigration, the strict approach involving ICE signaled strong leadership to supporters, but images of family separations, detention center conditions, and humanitarian concerns created discomfort among a large section of the population. This issue became a national debate within the first year, leading to confrontations between states, courts, and the federal government. This strictness also gave rise to the feeling among some groups that while the administration emphasized law enforcement, social and humanitarian balance was weakening, leaving moderate voters uncertain. On the foreign policy front, tough sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and support for the opposition of Venezuela conveyed that the U.S. was ready to take a firm stance in Latin America. However, the absence of expected political change, the deepening humanitarian crisis, and limits of international cooperation meant that this policy failed to deliver clear success, intensifying criticism over the lack of decisive outcomes. Alongside these policy issues, Trump's administrative and communication style also became a major factor influencing public opinion by the end of the first year. His direct, rapid, and often confrontational statements on social media energized supporters, but increased feelings of instability and uncertainty among opponents and independent voters. Continuous clashes with the media, judiciary, and intelligence agencies strengthened the perception that governance was dominated more by conflict than cooperation. As a result, political polarization deepened within the first year itself. On the economic front, despite some positive employment indicators, the lack of clear and broadly accepted outcomes on healthcare policy, tax reform, and Social Security led to the sense that the administration's priorities focused on swift decisions without consensus on their long-term social impact. Together, these factors created an environment in which Trump's supporters viewed his actions as bold leadership challenging the system, while critics described them as risky and divisive. Amid this sharp divide, public dissatisfaction appeared to rise in surveys conducted about 1 year into his term. Overall, Trump's early period was marked by big promises, rapid policy shifts, and strong messaging, but these same features also tested public trust within the first year. A large section of the public did not appear fully reassured about policy impact, governance stability, and national unity, and this imbalance became the main basis for the decline in his early performance ratings. This imbalance was further reinforced by constant clashes with Congress, legislative gridlock, and shifting priorities, strengthening the perception that, while the administration's direction was clear, its implementation lacked stability. Many key policy proposals during the first year were either partially implemented or stalled by legal and political obstacles, leading even supporters to sense a gap between expectations and results. Internationally, tensions with traditional allies, questions over NATO and trade agreements, and distancing from multilateral platforms intensified debate about America's global role, raising concerns that a hardline approach might weaken long-term strategic interests. Domestically, social divisions, racial issues, and public protests further tested the administration's ability to balance law and order messaging with the need for national unity. As a result, by the end of the first year, it became clear that the country was undergoing an economic, political, and social transition, during which opinions about presidential performance became sharply polarized. Turning to George W. Bush, the decline in public sentiment about 1 year into his term had different but equally powerful causes. His early presidency was shaped by post-9/11 national security concerns, military interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the global war on terror. While this initially earned broad support, prolonged conflicts, rising casualties, increasing costs, and questions about clear outcomes gradually weakened confidence. At home, economic uncertainty, mixed reactions to energy policy and tax cuts, and doubts over intelligence justifications for war created skepticism among parts of the public. Over time, the focus on security and foreign policy was seen by many as coming at the expense of everyday domestic concerns. As war fatigue and doubts replaced early unity, public opinion surveys conducted about 1 year into Bush's term showed declining confidence, with about 52% expressing negative views. This reflected combined effects of long, costly security decisions, domestic imbalance, transparency concerns, and a widening gap between expectations and reality. For Barack Obama, understanding public sentiment about 1 year into his term requires viewing the economic, political, and social context together. Obama assumed office during a severe economic recession and global financial instability. Expectations were extremely high. In his first year, he introduced stimulus packages, banking reforms, and measures to rescue the auto industry. While these signaled active crisis management, their impact was not immediately or evenly felt by ordinary people. Unemployment remained high, housing prices fell, and debt burdens persisted, creating the perception that policies existed but benefits would take time to reach the ground. Healthcare reform intensified political debate, deepening polarization. Legislative gridlock and the need for compromise slowed progress, while foreign policy efforts to reduce military presence and restore multilateral diplomacy did not yield immediate visible success. Obama's calm and measured communication earned international praise but left some domestic audiences feeling leadership was not decisive enough. As a result, public opinion after about 1 year reflected a divided picture, with roughly 48% expressing negative views, a mix of hope and frustration rather than outright rejection. In Bill Clinton's case, public sentiment about 1 year into his term reflected comparatively greater stability. Clinton took office during economic slowdown and deficit concerns, but his early focus on budget discipline, tax reform, and long-term financial stability gradually showed signs of improvement. Despite criticism over certain policies, job creation, private investment, and growth in the technology sector strengthened the sense that the economy was moving in the right direction. Clinton's pragmatic communication style helped him connect with voters, even as some legislative challenges persisted. Foreign policy was relatively less confrontational, and domestic economic improvements reassured many citizens. As a result, about 36% expressed negative views after 1 year, lower dissatisfaction compared to the other presidents discussed. Finally, it is important to understand that this analysis does not claim to offer a final or permanent judgment. It is based on public opinion surveys conducted at specific moments in time, reflecting the mood and perceptions of those periods. Public opinion changes with circumstances, policies, and events, and no presidency can be fully defined by data from a single year. The percentages seen in the cases of Trump, Bush, Obama, and Clinton represent reflections of public sentiment at particular points, not final verdicts. They should be viewed as milestones within a broader political journey where opinion continues to evolve and history is assessed with time and context.